Hi, my name is Destiny and welcome to my little sewing corner. Today I'm going to be giving you 3 ideas on how to add some whimsy to your wardrobe. And it's summertime, so these are all summertime appropriate. The first one is simply adding ruffles to a crop top and or basically just any top that you don't mind adding some length to. You can get creative with the pattern, and so I made one for my mom because she was complaining about not being able to find tube tops that were long enough for her. And yeah, I added a orange plaid. I bought a yard of fabric for $5 and there was leftovers, so that brought me to my second project, which was adding godets to a tight dress that I had. And so this was like a really good way to add some movement and some flow. And I just feel overall like way more comfortable in this dress than I did before. And it was my first time doing godets, but I think I figured it out. So I'm excited to show you how to do that. And the third project that I did recently was converting a baggy button-up into a sleeveless button-up, and it is reminiscent of like a 1950s housewife look, and it's really cute. Yeah, so these are the 3 ideas I have to like add some whimsy to your wardrobe. There's like a bunch of button-up funky pattern tops at the thrift store, so you really have a lot to choose from, and I chose like this funky green color. So yeah, this is what I needed to add a pop of color to my wardrobe over the summer, and I really wanted it to have like a pinstripe look, so I can't believe that I found this. I got super lucky. But yeah, let's get started. I'll show you how to make each one. So you first have to decide how much ruffles you actually want, and then you're gonna measure the bottom of your base piece and multiply it by how much ruffles you want. So I did about 1.5, and I already cut out one piece of my yard, and now I have to go to the second row to make it long enough, and I'm cutting that out. And then after that, you're gonna go ahead and combine these 2 pieces. I used French seams so that it would be really clean on the inside. And then to make the gathers, I lengthened my stitch length, which is normal for doing ruffles so that you could pull on the thread. But I also increased the tension to as high as it would go. And so this makes automatic ruffles. And I removed the threads to the bottom of the shirt so that I could work with the raw edge of the shirt and that there would be less bulk on the bottom. And then so I have my piece and I'm just adjusting the ruffles so that it is the same width as the top. And I attached the pieces using a 3-to-1 method for finishing, which is a variation of a French seam, but you need your main fabric to be a little bit longer, and since I undid the seams, this method was okay to do. But basically you sew wrong sides together. You can press the seam allowance up, or you can do like I'm doing, and you can just kind of push the seam allowance forward and fold your fabric over it. So you want to make sure that you're holding on to the seam allowance and that it is facing up and not down. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pin it to make sure that it stays in place, and it's basically covering the entire seam allowance. Here's another angle, and yeah, just being careful, making sure that I can feel the seam allowance underneath. And now I'll be sewing onto the plaid fabric, and then to finish it off, I'm just folding the bottom up twice to do a double fold hem and seal all of the raw edges. So here it is done. Let me know if you guys try this out or if you do a different method. My main fabric was kind of stretchy, so I feel like it stretched a little bit, but that's okay. Okay, so these are the steps on adding your godet. First, you're gonna decide where to place your godet, how big it will be. Then we're gonna make a pattern piece and sew our piece on. So I was just kind of eyeballing it, and I figured that 10 inches would look good. So I taped a couple pieces of paper together and I made it 10.5 inches long so that it would have room for a hem. And I made it about 5 inches wide. And so I don't have a ruler, but that would have made it a little bit easier. So I just used my my measuring tape to keep it at the top, and then I just kind of swung it around to make sure I had 10.5 inches all the way around, because it will look a little shorter on the edges. So there it is, and I also made a side panel, but I won't be going over that in this video, but here it is. I needed 4 godets in total, so I thought I would make my life easier, and I folded my fabric in half, and then I folded it again so that I would cut the 4 pieces simultaneously. And as you can see on the pattern piece, I added a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So don't forget to add that before cutting out your pattern piece, or keep that in mind as you're cutting out your fabric. Also, you might notice I added a 1/4 inch on the bottom, and I didn't need to do that because I already made it 10.5 inches long, and my slash in my dress is only going to be 10 inches. So I didn't need to do that, but it worked out in the end. And I've already added my side panels, but I'm just gonna quickly show you how to do the slash so that it's symmetrical. So you're going to get your measuring tape and eyeball where you want it. And so I want it to be here, so I'm just measuring 10 inches up and marking. And then I also measure from the side seam, and I did that on both sides to make sure that they were the same distance from the side seam. And now I'm just cutting it out. To me, the tutorial that had the best results involved interfacing and marking a point right above your cut. And then you also mark onto your godet piece. You do the 1/4 inch seam allowance just only at the top, and then you know where your dot is. So then you connect dot to dot and you put a pin in place, and this will give you the best results. The top marked point is still pinned, and I had just grabbed the fabric and pinned all along up until the point. And then I noticed that the other woman, when she was done pinning, this marker point was no longer pinned, but there was a pin pretty close underneath it, like here. And she did explain that having this gap between the 2 fabrics is okay. So now we can go ahead and sew. And here's how it came out. I think it's my best one. It is really flat and meets at a really nice point. So if you remember how I had a little bit extra of a hem because I left room for the hem and I added seam allowance, well, what I did was I just kind of like cut the piece into like a scallop, I thought that that would be cute because I had also did that to my side panels, and I just thought it'd be nice to add some asymmetry to the skirt, but it definitely was harder to hem, so keep that in mind. And here is the final look. And finally, to make the fitted sleeveless blouse, the first thing to do is cut off the sleeves, and then you can try the top on inside out or place it on a mannequin inside out. For more precise tailoring, it's probably better just to try it on yourself, but my mannequin is adjustable and it was easier to film this way. So the first thing I did was pinch how much of the waist I need to get taken in, and I did that along the side seam, but I also decided to add 2 darts in the front under the bust. And I'm also trying to make sure that I'm taking in about the same amount on each side. Now you can carefully remove the shirt and mark with chalk every pin. I'm also making sure that the shirt is lying flat, and then I'm removing the waist pins along the side so that I can take measurements on both sides and marking the same measurement on both sides with a darker pencil to make sure it's even. And now that is the new mark that I will follow. So now I can connect the small markings so I have a clear line to sew on each side, and I'll pin along the line so the fabric stays in place and I can now sew. Then you can grab the front dart and place it on its side, measure the highest point, and make sure that this is even with the second dart, just like you did with the waist. So I'm drawing a straight line from the highest point, and I'm tapering up and down. Sorry for the bad filming here. I will show you what it looks like in just a second. So here is the line, and I'm also pinning along it so that it stays in place while I sew. And to sew a nice taper, I start in the middle at the high point and I sew down, and then I cut like I'm doing now, and I'll turn it around so I can start in the middle again and continue to sew from the highest point to the lowest point. Then I was able to cut the sleeves into a better shape, and after this I was able to try it on, and I noticed that there was loose fabric at the top, and so I realized that I had to make a bust dart. And making a bust dart was the same process as doing the front darts. I just kind of grabbed the loose fabric and tried to make sure that I was grabbing evenly on both sides. And I ran into a little bit of trouble, so I had to undo the darts a couple times, but in order to fix it, all I had to do was measure and make sure that both sides were the same distance from the shoulder seam. And then I also did a hem, and a little trick for doing hems on these types of shirts is folding it in half so that you can cut both sides at the same time, and you can also follow along the curve if you like, which I didn't really do because I wanted it to be straighter. And then the other thing I did was I used my sleeve fabric to make bias by cutting at a 45-degree angle and then sewing these strips together. And this was enough bias tape to do the sleeves, and I rolled up the bottom to do the hem, and here is the finished look.